So we're joined today by Lily, author of She of the Night from Theion Books. Could you give us as brief a biography as you can of yourself, please?
I'm a sorcerer residing in the western parts of Sweden. Been active magically since the early 90s, and I don't know, for the past 16 years, been devoted quite much to the corpus of Greek magical papyri. I have my second publication out now, and it's focused on Lilith, and my first one was focused on Hecate. So I have a tendency to work with and turn to and venerate goddesses, humaness as well. Yeah.
Excellent. So, how did you come to Lilith? What was what drew you, or what drew Lilith to you, or vice versa? Would you say?
Both Hecate and Lilith are goddesses or deities or spiritual creatures that I have never been drawn to. I even harbored some disinterest, but with Lilith, she first started to reach out to me in the mid-90s, and in the beginning it was quite subtle, and then a year after that, roughly, it was anything but subtle. So I was already given the title of this book in the 90s, but I thought it should have been a love song to her. Only trouble is I don't play any instrument, and I got hung up very long that it should be a song, and I hope it turned out a ballad of sorts, but it was much later, in 2013, that I got a second vision about this title, and then I was told to write the book for a year. So I set aside a year, but that wasn't enough for her. So yeah, it have taken quite the time.
So, talk about. I mean, one thing that really struck me in the book was, well, from the excerpts of the book I've read, was the sort of history of Lilith seems to be sort of spotty, to say the least, doesn't it? In terms of there's, I think you use the word shards. There's like shards of of sort of information. Why do you think that is?
It's really tricky for me because in a way I almost sense there is a taboo for me personally to try to analyze these matters. I've talked about seeds and germinations or predecessors or foreshadowing that all merged in her, but unlike goddesses that were absorbed into the very broad Ishtar, Astarte umbrella, I've never really seen Lilith as an amalgamation. I have always sensed her as more or less fully formed from the start, but people might have only caught glimpses, or since she is a multifaceted goddess, at least goddess in my book, they might have met her under different guises. Yeah, that are some of the reflections.
Do you think? Sorry. Do you think, or can you unpack a bit for me whether in your research and your understanding of Lilith, whether Lilith has been a goddess that people have worshipped directly, or has she been a sort of a player in other pantheons, if you know what I mean? With Lilith appears on the periphery of things, but are there established cults that have existed directly, exclusively towards Lilith?
No, I have never got that impression. It is something you protected yourself against, but I don't know at which time. It is certainly being able to peel back layers and unpack her as like the great work that Jake Stratton Kent have made over many volumes, where he identifies Nama, Paimon, Lilith, Belet as some very important guides. And if you have them on your side, you can really be handled keys to working in or to success in your art. But no, I haven't got the impression at all that there have been a cultus to Lilith. And yeah.
Interesting. So one of the kind of early conceptions of Lilith is this sort of idea of emptiness. But in the book, you seem to imply that she sort of embodies the opposite of that, kind of fullness. Could you talk about that a little bit?
That with the metaphysical part is more philosophical or poetic. So no, I actually find it quite hard to talk about. But the feminine darkness and the potentiality of everything as the opposite or the void of everything. But yeah, if we talk about linear time, then it sort of feel anachronistic to put the name of Lilith as that primeval feminine darkness that was before all, because that is more represented by Tiamat, or even a preconception of Tiamat, because with Tiamat we still have just like with the Ymer in Norse mythology, after she or he was slain, then really developed the world, the earth, the gods, and everything after.
It was interesting. You mentioned Tiamat, and obviously the book looks at Tiamat and is it Apsu? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Yes.
There are 3 spellings, and 2 of them refers to the same.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's always great when that happens, isn't it?
No,
but yeah,
it's horrible.
But you sort of talk about how they kind of help in sort of shaping this kind of early images of kind of chaos and creation. Could you elaborate a bit on that at all?
I think Tiamat and Apsu are paramount to, well, in lack of better terms, Western or Near Eastern and Western ways of understanding and processing the pre-existences, and whether later religions and cultus like it or not, most seem very influenced by this way of reasoning and categorizing the world and the pre-worlds. I don't know if I really can say much more on that. I think I should maybe write separate thing about just Tiamat and also her 11 offspring.
If we jump into Lilith, then so if we have Tiamat and Apsu, who I think is that the abyss, the watery abyss. Anyway, how does
the watery abyss? Yeah.
Yeah. How does Lilith emerge as the sort of next phase, next part of the next generation of entities or archetypes or goddesses, gods?
Well, I don't see her as emerging at all in that sense, and she's also not part of the next generation because they are different cultures. So predecessors or seeds to Lilith can, within Mesopotamian culture, of course, be found in Lamashtu, in Ardat-Lili, in Kisikili-Lake, also in Apsu or Su, the thief that stole the Tablets of Destinies, and to a certain degree in Ninkigal and Ereshkigal as well. So you have all those, and those are just 2 generations after Tiamat.
And these are part of the sort of the Mesopotamian seeds for what you, as you're sort of putting it, for what Lilith will coalesce from in part. Are there other cultural sort of seeds that predate Lilith that you can share with us that sort of fed into what we know as Lilith now, or what you're going to help us understand as Lilith now?
One of the aspects that I maybe downplayed in the book, but I hope I didn't, is Ninlil. Some view Lilith as a preeminently fierce female wind spirit, as a manifestation or an emanation of a primal nocturnal avian goddess. And in the context of Lilith's earliest connections that can be traced in Babylonian and Sumerian accounts, we find Ninlil. And she's the female ruler of air and queen of the breeze, and held quite a vast authority. And among her offspring we find the moon, but also the very important underworld deity Nergal. And in her lineage, we also find her granddaughter, Inanna. And Ninlil, or in Akkadian Muliltu, is identified with the constellation Mulmargida, the wagon or vane. I don't know how you pronounce that in English. Vane?
Yeah.
It's old for a wagon. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is our Ursa Major. And as with Lilith, the element of Lil or Lil in Ninlil's name connects her to winds, breezes, and to ghosts. And Ninlil's husband is the lord of the underworld and lord of the ghosts.
One thing I was going to just jump back to very quickly was I found this idea of the Tablet of Destinies quite interesting. Could you talk to us a bit about the Tablet of Destinies? I found that it'd be a good thing to discuss.
It would be tad too easy and probably incorrect parable with comparing how Apsu stole the Tablet of Destinies with Prometheus, but I would compare it to how Lilith wants to awaken mankind from slumber or from dormant states, and how she encourages us to break free, in many cases break free from ourselves. And this bird, this monstrous, gigantic bird, which in later stories helps, I reckon, at this Gilgamesh father, is set to watch the Tablet of Destinies in the underworld. and then decides to steal it for himself. And he actually even claims Enlilship, and that is the same as the supreme godhood or crown that Mulil, the later leader of the gods, held. And when it's later spoken about the sacred tree that Inanna wanted to shape and make a throne for herself of, and also make a bed of, when that tree is spoken of, we find that a snake immune to incantations is nestled in its roots, and in the middle of the tree, in some hollow, a phantom maid have made herself at home, and in the top of the tree, perched there with its young and also the Tablet of Destinies, we find Ansu. And Ansu is the one that greets you in the Great Hall of the British Museum, on that large relief. I think he's pursued by Merodach, swinging thunders at him. And he was earlier misgendered and interpreted as Tiamat, even though it's clearly that it is the Sioux bird or Ansu.
Yeah, there's a Tiamat statue in the British Museum as well, isn't there? It's near the, unless they've moved it, which they don't seem to. I think it's next to the John Dee implements, the mirror and whatnot. It's just off to the right, but yeah, it's weird that they misgendered it, as you said. But so the yes, so there's sort of symbols that seem to follow Lilith around. So there's like wind, night, and owl. Could you talk a little bit about that? The shifting sort of symbols that follow her through time, kind of thing. Why do these symbols shift, and why those symbols in particular?
I'm not so sure that they really shift. I think they have, even though it's sometimes hard to explain how they came to be tied. I think those that you pointed out have been quite consequent in depictions and pre-cults tied to similar beings. As I mentioned earlier, the part with Lil that could represent ghosts and also breezes, that term was later adopted by Semites who transformed it into Lilum as the masculine form and Lilatu for the feminine form. And this was probably conceived or developed during the Babylonian captivity. And originally this Lilatu or Lilaatu denoted what the Akkadians referred to as Kelila, and that meant handmaid of the ghost or servant of the phantom. And before long, this came to mean servant of the night mover, and when different cultures mixed, it also came to mean the whole concept of the evening or the night. But as for the owls, that really are the $1 million question in my book. They are so enigmatic, and I don't know. Do you have any theories or do you have any experiences with owls yourself?
I think there's, there's quite a lot we can say about owls as in a sort of broader sense. That, if I'm not mistaken, I think does Hecate have an owl connection as well? Off the top of my head, maybe that's an association I've made up, but there's a whole thing about the fact that owls as sort of apex predatory creatures of the night with their forward-facing eyes and their ability to sort of creep up on us rapidly and silently.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just amazing things to see flying at night, swooping silently between trees and things, although they can also make a bit of a noise themselves, like the screech owl, which I gather is Lilith's particular owl. And I'm not sure what the indigenous owls of the Middle Eastern kind of region actually are. But it's interesting.
Yeah, they are often connected to jinn and presages and omens.
Yeah. And then there's bizarrely they're connected to UFO lore. And these interactions with non-human entities, non-human intelligences. So I think there's definitely something fascinating about them. And bizarrely, owls are, in the modern world, to my understanding, quite popular creatures. People find them endearing to look at, and they have these very sort of sentient faces. But they have been associated with, well, I guess Athena on one side and knowledge, Bebo and things like that. But then also this darkness and this sort of suspicion and these sort of emissaries of the night.
I grew up in
Isn't Moloch sometimes depicted as an owl, I believe? I know the conspiracy theorists that keep an eye on Bohemian Grove, the big meeting place in California in the Redwoods. There's a giant owl statue there, and I know the conspiracy theorists kind of track that to Moloch, but whether or not they're correct is about anything really, but especially about the occult sort of side of things. But I have also seen Moloch in other literature referred to as an owl. So yeah, I mean, I've got an obsession with owls. I weirdly, I don't know why, I collect them myself. I've got a massive collection of owls.
Wow.
So there's just something about them. I'm just drawn to them. I love them. I think
I grew up in a valley where several pairs of Eurasian eagle owl, the largest owl kind, lives, and boy, that was some scary experiences. Some of my first útiseta practices on tall mountain in the wee hours of the morning when they came in and they came along with the fog from the ocean, and they were so silent, and then you saw them swoop down, didn't make a sound until they flew away with its prey. And in the Erigala or Irkala, the Mesopotamian underworld, we often find the descriptions of the dead and departed being clothed in the ways of birds and always feathered. So I think that must be an echo as well from their presages of death, and also as emissaries and spies and messengers from the other side or from the underworld.
I mean, they were obviously represented quite well in David Lynch's work as well, in Twin Peaks. The owls are not what they seem.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I find the whole cave part very Lilithian in the second season. I've heard so many people disliking the second season, and I just think it's fabulous.
I like the sort of darker aspects of it. I think I found the comedy a bit difficult. That was the only bit.
Oh, you mean the third season?
Yeah, the second season. In the second season, there's a whole section where they're.
I have forgotten. It's like a soap opera at times. Yeah.
That's the only bit I really found difficult. But the Windermere stuff, the cave stuff, I think is some of the best Twin Peaks stuff. It's
for sure.
So you were mentioning practices that you were doing when you saw these owls swooping in. What was you said a word there? I'm not sure what the word was.
Útiseta, sitting out. Um, I know we can't call it shaman or shamanic, but I guess it's the Scandinavian equivalent to a shamanic practice, when you spend a night on an animal hide at some liminal place and either try to go astral or wait for omens or meeting spirits to interact with. And many aspiring magicians try to make that as one of their first active magic rites, at least among the friends I know when I was young.
So is that like a sort of enforced like proximity ordeal? You know, you've got this hide, and then you don't leave the hide. Is that right? So you're sort of like stuck to that location for the duration that you're out there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
naked and placed on that hide, and the first time I did it was on top of Bronze Age burial mound at the Thing place. Um, I guess you would maybe call it a moot. You know, where you held assembly in pre-Christian times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A thing, an old thing, or any of these things. Yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what is the significance of the Queen of the Night plaque, and what it reveals, kind of regardless of sort of scholarly debates? What do you find that the plaque reveals?
I kind of don't want to give away my conclusion of it in the book, but first of all, I just like us to acknowledge, or maybe you don't agree at all with it, but I think it's really kind of beautiful that we actually can't know for sure who is depicted, because we don't know anything about the excavation stratas it was found in. We don't know the context. We still actually can't know for sure if it's ancient at all. It have been accused many times of being a forgery, and until I think it's a Bristolian university releases their carbon 14 numbers, I think we don't even know if it's ancient. There, to me, it's really foreshadowing of Lilith in instead of a point as with Chambly, then in a single plaque, and many of the attributes found in that plaque is repeated over the millennia after. Some claim it to be Ishtar, and of course there are many reasons for why it could be, but some of the hallmarks found in it, or rather the way that they are combined, is not in line with an identification of Ishtar. And it certainly could be Ishtar's sister, Ereshkigal, but and the whole imagery fits actually perfect to that. But we have a very big problem because no depictions of Ereshkigal exist. So that this would be the first, and also in this grand way. I think the British Museum paid something like £1 million for it, and it's possibly one of the most important, human cultural artifacts, just in the way that it is carried out. It would be quite shocking if it was Ereshkigal's, then. But then the third alternative is not much better, and then it would point to something more of a demonic entity, and demonesses did not receive veneration. The only demonic creatures or spiritual creatures in the Mesopotamian world that actually received some kind of veneration were the seven, the Sebiter, and they were so tied to Anu as messengers and as also distinguished lords and warriors and connected with the stars. And none of that is applicable for any demoness. So we're really at some kind of impasse as to ascertain for sure which the identity is. Hopefully, we at least can find out in a couple of years or two if the plaque is ancient.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that kind of leads nicely to another point in the book. One thing I actually really liked about the writing was that you sort of acknowledged that some of it's scholarly, but you also you sort of place some importance on kind of personal gnosis within the writing and within the your own research. How did you make that kind of work? You know, mixing your own gnosis with kind of with accepted scholarly research, because it certainly adds an interesting dimension to the book that I really enjoyed.
I spent so long just immersed in this universe and writing the book, so it didn't matter if it was done in a scholarly way, because I was still isolated. I almost lived as a recluse hermit. And then the writing and copying down of these sources became both a devotional act, but also an exhausting manner to tire the brain and then still push through. So several times during actually footnoting or checking up this Akkadian source, manic episodes would unfold, and sometimes even possession. So that wasn't hard to merge the two. I have thought over the last couple of years if I could ever separate the scholarly part, so I potentially could use that in a university, and I pretty soon gave that up. But I still hope that it can be a reference work, and that I have been very clear and open with both what my personal insights or beliefs are, and then what the sources themselves say.
Do you ever find that your own gnosis ever kind of confirms some of the scholarly stuff, if that makes sense? So, like, you often hear about kind of people writing in a sort of visionary style that they'll kind of there'll be like scholarly questions that will suddenly become answered, but you would have already been answered through these kind of visionary. Do you see what I mean? Like, there's like
yeah. Not during this process, but actually quite recently, when I've been writing my new book, and it's loads on Mesopotamian star lore, and then I find it very relieving to see in what you just described. But yeah, for me, that's probably slightly uncharted territory, but I see what you mean.
Yeah, it's to me that's the kind of, when I'm looking for not proof of magic or whatever, but that's always one of the more interesting side effects, let's say, of magical work. Sometimes is when you have these kind of almost like the gnosis proves the academia, almost, if that makes sense. It's like yeah, it's I always find that kind of interesting. But one thing, there's Lilith sort of gets picked up in Jewish mystical kind of traditions, and could you talk a bit about how Lilith became kind of associated with things like menstruation and blood, and sort of why these they sort of become reevaluated somewhat as sacred domains, don't they? I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
I don't think they really became revalued as sacred. I think they have always been, and but what is left after maybe the Copper Stone Age ended, and male gods came to dominate, and the tyranny of city-states and settled cultures with their not seldom patriarchal structures on the minds and on the bodies and on nature, then what was left was only the innate reverence connected with menstrual blood remained, as a form of awe, but also as a phobia. And with an imbalance between sun and moon worship, I think the settled cultures put an overemphasis on solar gods and solar wine. So this became feared instead.
This kind of Queen of Husks idea, could you talk a little bit about the Queen of Husks?
The shadow of the divine, or more of the Queen of Husks? Because in the Queen of Husks, we more move into the Clipbot territory.
Yeah, this is actually where I was going to sort of. So she sort of has this sort of divine shadow and impurity, doesn't she? But then the clip-off side of things is interesting as well. Could we discuss both, actually?
Yeah, for sure. As for the Clipbot, I think one of the best contextualizations is that the Zohar states that the emanator had to create everything in the world, and that it was necessary for the emanator to create and supply the world with everything, including the Kelipot or Clipbot. And another related aspect or key evidence or clue, or how you want to see it, regarding the shells is found in the Rabbi Yohanan and Resh Lakish story. And it's about a king that demanded a great palace built upon a dunghill, and then forbade the dunghill from ever being mentioned again. And this recurring mention of dunghill, dregs, refuse, and broken vessels are some of the elements in how the shells are portrayed. And they are sort of a prerequisite for creation, and also inevitable byproduct of creation. And since they pertain to pre-worlds, they are within Kabbalah actually one of the 7 things that are forbidden to ponder, indirectly at least. And they are forbidden to ponder, since then we are speaking about matters that we should not be speaking of, and that means pre-existences and pre-worlds before this.
Yeah. If I recall from, I've got a fantastic book on Hebrew mythology, and Robert Graves' book on Hebrew mythology, and
it's got which one?
Hebrew Mythology by Robert Graves.
Fantastic.
Much more famous for his white goddess and his Greek mythologies, but his Hebrew mythology book is really great analysis of various things. And there's quite a lot given there to the relationship between Adam and Lilith within that mythos, and Lilith and Eve and that sort of thing. And does any of these kinds of Hebrew Jewish kind of ideas and things help inform your understanding of Lilith? And if I recall, she was kind of in that mythos Adam's first wife prior to the creation of women, and the mother of abominations. Various sort of titles that we see used in broader sort of context in the modern sort of occult world with sort of Babylon and these kinds of ideas. So this idea of Lilith as an female but other than Eve, who is sort of human female and safe within our species group. Lilith being sort of outside that, and as a result, the mother of abominations, which would sort of, for me, tie in with some sort of cliphotic shells or husks. Fantastic point about the manure, the midden, and the broken pottery on that. Never made that connection myself. Good, but yeah. So how does your understanding of Lilith sort of fit in with that?
I'm gonna tie in with the part from Arabic folklore, and then it's about how God created the androgen Adam, and he had the potentiality for both feminine and male, and then after a while he was separated. And the female that in these folklore accounts remain unnamed up until a certain point turns into the perfected female in the world. And she is then the equivalent of Lilith. She is es Shebian, or later called also the Karina. And they have a conumbium, she and Adam, and they have offspring, but their happiness was short-lived because since they had been formed from dust and also been one, she couldn't acknowledge his superiority, or that he would be held in some kind of other respect, and that is also reflected in the Iblis refusing to prostrate for the androgen Adam earlier on. And in Hebrew folklore, when Adam actually, because in most of those folklore accounts, she is not the first wife. She is, with she being Lilith, he actually have his partner Chava, Eve, and then they have a falling out, and for something like 130 years he spends away from her in the wilderness, and then Lilith, and sometimes Nama and Lilith, approaches him, and they have offspring, which then are the demons of the world. And we see similar echoes of that in Scandinavian folklore accounts, but I guess we'll get to that a bit later.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting how Lilith kind of becomes, is reimagined the right word? Like Lilith sort of turns up, at least in various different cultures, and the ophidian kind of serpentine kind of imagery of her is quite interesting. Could you talk to that a little bit?
I can first of all just share my very personal view on it, and that's simply that I think that Lilith from the beginning appeared to humans in ophidian form, but in the first accounts of her, when we actually speak about Lilith in Hebrew sources, then she is part of an androgen snake, and she is tied together with her first spouse, Samael, and then they are either a two-headed snake or both inhabiting the snake. And it is this snake, this androgen, and that is supposed to have been in the Celestial Garden or Garden of Eden. So it is both Samael and Lilith, or in certain accounts, only Samael or only Lilith, that impregnates Eve when it speaks to her. And it's because of this blemish that the snakes leave, or it's also called the slime of the serpent. And that is what causes the first menstruation to occur.
There's a celestial ophidian kind of connection as well, isn't there, with the sort of demon star, the Algol? Is that how you pronounce it? Algol?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
there's sort of
sorry.
echoes of Lilith's presence there, isn't there?
Yes, for sure. I just thought that Ulysses mentioned something, or was it you that mentioned something more about menstruation? Because it's quite connected to Lilith and also to the shells or the lethal powers of Lilith. But we don't have to address that now if you don't want.
No, we can do. Yeah.
I made a talk last year about Lilith and the blood of the moon, and it focused on how Lilith becomes charged with lethal powers when the moon is on the wane, and in tandem with when the so-called Shekinah menstruates and departs from her spouse, the god or the emanator. Lilith appears and as a servant maid, takes the place of the Shekinah and actually seduces the god when the moon is on the wane. And mortal women during their own menstruation, and also for 7 nights and 7 days after the cessation of their flow, are counted as impure and bearers of lethal powers, and they are then prone or more susceptible to be possessed by Lilith herself. And people that then approaches a woman during her time of impurity may risk to get an eternal stain on their soul. And for example, nails which have menstrual blood under them was considered extremely dangerous, and you often find sources talking about how these nails were sold and to be used in rites of maleficia against people you wanted to destroy. And some of these legal ties with menstruation is also echoed in Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy.
And Blood of the Moon also sort of continues on into things like Thelema as well, doesn't it? Where it kind of plays quite an important part in some quite key rituals or masses, I would say, in particular. But so obviously the Greeks also kind of reimagined Lilith somewhat. Could you talk a little bit about the kind of like the sort of essence? you talk a lot about kind of the essences of Lilith appearing through some of these kind of, fairly key Greek kind of figures like Medusa. Yeah, Lamia. Is it Lamia? Or yeah, Lamia.
The Greek parts. Some of those that I highlight are, just as you said, the Empusa and the Lamia, but also the sirens and the harpies I try to address. And one of the creatures in Greek mythology that maybe have closest ties to Lilith would be Gelo or Gilu, and the famed lexicon Suda described it as a phantasma daimonos or daimonios that appears to the ill-fated and is sent out by Hecate. And the origin for this Gilo or Gelo is that she was a young woman who either died in childbed or died childless, and then tries to nurture young children up until the age of 1, but fails miserably in doing so because she end up killing them. And children who doesn't put on weight and suffer other kind of child diseases during the first year and fades away and eventually even die are called Gilovrota, eaten by Gilo. And that finds a parallel in a pre-shadowing figure from Mesopotamia. Lamashtu was a snatcher of youngs. And Lilith in Hebrew, maybe most of all in Hebrew sources, is slayer of young children. There she has a shorter time window, something like 40 days for boys and slightly less for girls.
Yeah, so sort of Greek myth, and especially when it comes to Lilith, does seem to kind of present us with a kind of, I guess, a cultural anxiety, and in a weird way that the kind of the sort of monstrous version of Lilith kind of tells us a bit about sort of how femininity, I can get that word out, and kind of power were kind of perceived during the Greek period. Could you talk to that a little bit, because that was also a very interesting observation in the book.
I think there is plenty to say about monstrous femininity and in Greek sources, and maybe even more so, I would say, in Hebrew sources, where it's almost an open hostility against not only controlled or high-ranking members of the female sex, but women in general, and definitely for those that are considered as others. But unfortunately, I seldom apply that lens or thinking to these sources. And I have studied ethnology and some other cultural studies, but it's sort of like when you're approached with someone with flaming hair and the upper body of a siren and a foot that have a strange clangor to it, also equipped with talons. all those aspects sort of goes out of the equation, and of course I maybe should later analyze those experiences, but then it might also risk lessening my own experience. So for selfish reasons, I have not done that or analyzed it in such ways, and that's also why I, for Lilith in general, doesn't consider her an archetype. It's rather that in different cultures, an archetype or archetypes have been created that could describe Lilith, or that could describe Lilith in one of her roles. But I rather find her as a very distinct, specific spiritual creature or goddess, and maybe with a fluid set of attributes or hallmarks, rather.
I'm wondering, Lily, if you would. You just mentioned the way that you mentioned the way you see Lilith, and I wondered if you would actually talk about what that actually is for you. We've heard a bit about the different sort of these forms or shards or fragments or forms of Lilith throughout ancient history. Where is Lilith today, and from your perspective? It's a big question, I realise.
Yeah, for sure. If we at times seek roles like the healer, destroyer, or think about that poison is only poison depending on the dosage, and that it can be medicine, I don't think that really applies to Lilith. Lilith is someone that you can have a very intimate relationship with, but it will be on her terms. So it's not very easily worked with deity, but she can have enormous boons to give, and that's why I recommend that one starts the ritual year in with the equinox, spring equinox, and then if you want to go down this route, first turn to Agrat Bat Mahalat, and then to her mother Mahalat, and then to Nama, and then last in the year, or even a couple of years into your workings with Lilithian beings, first then turn to Lilith. Where we find her, that's a big question. For me, it's often about the less structured forms of magic that more leans or tends towards mysticism. But it's definitely about breaking out, and it's also about communication. She's a very communicative goddess. So one wouldn't be surprised to find yourself under possession, or if you have someone working as a seer with you when you do your magic, and they can easily become possessed, and you can have very rewarding conversations with them.
So I guess
as for the healing or more upbuilding parts, I would more say it is similar to slash and burn agriculture. You burn something down, and then it can happen that the ground will be fertile, but that is not her main aim. And for the healing or upbuilding parts, there is a plethora of others to turn to. But once you're in her good favors, after courting her with various smoke offerings and sweet wine, you will find that many other rituals will work even better with her blessings behind them. And we must not forget that, for example, her first spouse is Samael, and in many senses, for example, within the Grimorium Verum, as the primal engine with its proclivities towards Mars days, then you will see that operations such as those also will go very well. And same if you operate within the Hygromanteia praxis, since it's based on Saturdays, and since Lilith is very Saturnian, it will have very good results.
Can I ask then about your own practice, as much as you're willing to disclose? Could you know, earlier on in the conversation, we'd mentioned this sort of Scandinavian kind of shamanic activities and things, and then you said there's a sort of mystical quality to your the way you approach or interact or engage with Lilithian themes, you know, and magical practices can take all manner of different forms, whether it's sort of long kind of ordeals or pilgrimages or vigils, or more classical sort of grimoire styles, high ceremonial rituals with fumigation and long orisons and regalia and so forth. You know what? Because I love rituals so much, I love to try and paint images in my head that I can try and see and digest the words that people use to describe their sort of ritual engagements. So are you willing to give us any insight into what it kind of looks like, or what form it takes for you?
Yes, and I very much respect those that are not willing to divulge that at all. But I really think as a species, as Homo ritualis, we are here to communicate with each other and learn from each other. Not only learn from spirits, but also maybe share what spirits have indicated are okay for us to share, and also what you deem okay from your own sense or intuition to share. Sadly, maybe not so much, but I don't use many of Scandinavian techniques. So the shamanic part meant very much in formative years, and every now and then when I'm in a crossroad in life, I turn to the same shamanic praxis, and then it's often connected to Hecate. And then at certain cross quarters of the year, and maybe even at some quarter rites, I also make use of runes, but that's about it for the context or the background that I am residing in. My own praxis is more focused or informed by the Greek magical papyri and the Hygromanteia and the Grimorium Verum, especially the shamanic goetic style that Yake proposes. So it's mostly ceremonial magic with longer operations, but I also have some daily devotions, and then for the new moon and the dark of the moon is mostly when I operate.
And are these parts
when,
of go on.
I was just going to quickly say, when we had David Beth on, he was talking about how he preferred non-transcendental magic. Would you consider the Lilith working to be transcendental, or would you consider it to be more of the body, as it were, of the earth?
Yeah, I'm pretty much with David on that one, and even though she is larger and have other ties, since she's also very connected to Nama, and Nama might be one of the most terrestrial of spirits I have encountered, and also a spirit that really relishes in the company of humans and is very keen to impart knowledge and help. Um, I definitely say that it's of the earthly and underworldly realm that all magic in my 2 volumes belong to.
Interesting. Sorry, you were going to say something, Ulysses?
I was just going to continue probing about some of the ritual activities, whether they were part of sort of a campaign working, so, a series of specific workings that has a start and an end, or whether they're more of a sort of religious inclination that you would, every equinox, for example, be engaged in some sort of communion kind of activity, or whether it's a muddle of the whole lot, or or whether it's one-off workings.
I have a past in an order, but that work meant fuck all to me. I only learned that I really dislike when humans gathered in too large numbers and the way clubs work, and I found turning to spirits endlessly more rewarding as for initiations and and help to become a more able sorcerer. We have had a local group, less than a dozen of practitioners that have met over the years for most of the quarter rites. It's now disbanded. I work in sync with some other practitioners in Greece, and I also undertook the 7-year cycle of trying out the year and the day praxis of Andrew Shumley for the Dragon Book of Essex, and that was very informative, especially when it came to stamina and being able to stay in these states and settings for maybe too long of a times, because I don't find it as very well adapted or working system for most magicians, but it was quite rewarding in its own sense, and in parts I have also written She of the Night to contextualize the 16 so-called gods of his retinue, or the 16 faithful gods that one turned to in these quarter and cross-quarter rites during the year.
I think the thing that I took away from the reading I did from the book was this kind of cross-pollination that seems to happen between sort of eras, I suppose. And how did you find it to how do I put this? Like, how did you was there a kind of a joy almost in sort of finding Lilith within all of these different kind of eras, as it were, like, you know, through the Greek, the Ophidian, all this kind of stuff? Was it like, I don't know, was there a kind of joy in that kind of pursuit?
I just like to make it clear for the readers that I, for example, don't consider Gilo as Lilith in the Greek sources, and it's only when it's truly applicable, like in for example the Arabic sources, when they speak about Sibian or the Grand Old Karina, that this is the same creatures as the Hebrews refer to as Lilith. And then we find in Greek and Eastern European folklore accounts, and so there you actually have Lilith, and sometimes explicitly, and other times it's one of her 12 or 14 names that are mentioned in charms. And for example, a very famous charm that is called 2000 Years of a Child Stealing Witch. You can really trace this bloody lineage from Phoenicia up through Eastern Europe, and then finally even in Northern Europe and Scandinavia. So that have been fantastic, and especially with Swedish sources, when I had found some mentionings from the late 1700s and early 1800s, talking about Lilith explicitly, and also find some traces of her in the 1600s. That have been fantastic. Real joy of like detective work or what have you. And I also must say that I've been so, even though it's an overused word, but I've been so blessed with finding so many scholars and professors that have been very kind and generous for me to probe them with questions. And more often than not, I have also received personal stories or experiences of Lilith from these quite old scholars. As long as I didn't quote them, they were fine with me getting them in print and so. So yeah, it had been a fantastic journey. I didn't hope it would take 12 years, but yeah, something like 9 years to write it, and then several years to hammer out the details and make it understandable, because it really have been a serpentine jumbling mess until my very kind proofreaders and editors stepped in.
It feels like the book, from what I've read, because obviously I've only had excerpts of the book, there seems to be a kind of a tension, I suppose, between whether Lilith is a archetype or a kind of fixed entity, if that makes sense. Like, there's do you consider Lilith an archetype because the Lilith thing, or whatever you want to call it, you know, the goddess sort of appears, it keeps reappearing throughout these kind of eras. Is it is Lilith an archetype, or is Lilith a fixed thing that appears through these different, you know, shards or emanations?
I don't consider Lilith an archetype at all. I consider her a very specific goddess, but as for fixed, that is probably one of the words that is least applicable to her. She had many hallmarks, and probably like if I in the future would go on and try to find a sort of a labeling system to identify Lilithian beings, I would maybe propose like 9 hallmarks that can point toward it being a Lilithian being, and then maybe 4 of them will need to be fulfilled to be able to call it that. And something like that with Lilith as well. Fluid, but definitely distinct. And what will know her from her calling cards and from her talon marks or whatever it is that she leaves you with. And she's also, at least in my experience, and there may be like 40 or 50 people I interviewed that were magicians themselves, and that I ended up not using in the book because I actually wanted a sort of a collage of experiences from other magicians. And what was one of the most common denominators was that you never needed to wonder if you had made contact. Uh, Either it is silent and numb and void, or you will know when you have made contact with She of the Night.
Mhm. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for giving us some of your time. Obviously, I've heard that there's a reprint of the books coming out at some point soon.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a reprint coming before the end of the year. I hope for maybe like a midwinter date or early mid-December, because that would also be a fitting date in Scandinavian traditions tied to Lilith.
Yeah, it'd be great. And I think just because from obviously we only managed to get hold of excerpts of the book, I'd love to get my hands on the full thing. So the opportunity to be able to do that would be quite thrilling. I'm quite pleased that it's been re-released. I know some magical publishers don't like to reissue books, but I've been quite pleased to see Theion doing it. When demanded. So I think there is a demand for this particular one to be republished, especially.
I am overwhelmed, and I feel so humbled that this interest exists, and I can't express enough how grateful I am to you two and to all readers interested. I don't think it's an understatement to say that it's my biggest work, and yeah, I won't attempt anything similar anytime soon.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it was an endeavor, to say the least. This one.
Half of ordeals.
Yeah, yeah. So what other things do you have in the pipeline, as they say? Can you talk to any future projects or?
For sure. I am currently expanding my first book, the Hecate book, and I will involve the son of Hecate and also tie it together with some Mesopotamian sources, which will tie in with star lore and wind lore, especially about the 7 directions that one turns to in the Summa Sacrae Magicae that was published early this year, and that have really improved my own magic ever since I started to using it. I have my always up and running my incense making, and I also make some astrological talismans. That's probably it. In a year from last week, I will be in Redditch in England for a lecture there at Pandemonium. And that's basically everything I have planned for now, I think.
Oh,
Sounds busy.
yeah. Yeah.
I have 2 or 3 months that I am allowed to be busy, and after that I must cut my hair and get their regular work.
Yeah. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I hope we can have future ones. And thank you again so much for giving us some of your time.
Thank you. Absolutely loved
Thank you
it.
so much.